Welcome back. This is video number 3 in our series, Hope-Filled Parenting. As in other series, I do encourage you to connect with me if you have any questions. And I'm hopeful that so far you've gained some insight and awareness of some tools that have already given you maybe some actionable plans that you can talk to your teen or formulated plan of action for increasing the level of awareness in your home as to the two things we've talked about so far. Number one is a vision of a compelling future. I think a lot of our teenagers' mental health is definitely connected to not really knowing what they want to do or how to even begin it. And so giving them the freedom and the space to turn dreams and visions into actionable choices is a valuable tool for our kids. So giving them that vision. And then secondly, helping them understand that their tasks, their job in your home is purposeful, valuable, needed, that there's no such thing as menial tasks. Everything is important. Picking trash up off the floor is huge, because imagine what would happen if no one did that. So giving those two mindsets to your teenagers is what we've already talked about. We're going to talk now about struggling with teen identity. And I have to address this big picture first. I really think that there's maybe too much alarmism going on about how much our teenagers are struggling with identity. That's like wondering if our children are going to go through puberty in their adolescent years. I want you to understand that it's normal, it's healthy, it's in fact necessary, it's good. It's not a crisis. The first person to even develop this whole concept is a psychosocial psychologist by the name of Erik Erikson. He lived in the early 1800s, worked with Freud. He was a German-American, and he developed these 8 stages of psychosocial development that's still used today in child psychology. That's something that I'm able to utilize a good bit in my work with teenagers. And there's 2 stages of development that is a normal, healthy, good thing for teenagers to go through. The first one is identity versus confusion. In other words, it's a given that your child is going to have identity confusion when they get to their adolescent years. It's okay. They're not weird. They're actually in the place of life where they should be trying to figure out who they really are compared to who maybe they either other people think they are, or who maybe other people are trying to make them. So a child developing a personal identity is a confusing process. Now, that being said, they carry this whole idea into their young adult years when they get to this next phase called intimacy versus isolation. And in that, what they're really trying to do is figure out who they can get close to and be intimate and maintain some individuality, and how they can separate from their group or even their family of origin in a way that they are able to maintain their independence. And it's okay, and it's healthy, and it's good, and it's normal. And so if they're experiencing some identity confusion as a teenager, let me just assure you, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay, that's part of the process. But you want to help them get to the place where they're able to understand the difference between, well, in our videos with our couples, we call it deep breathing technique, where couples are trying to figure out how to become intimate with one another and how to be their own person. Your teenagers doing that also as they get into their young adult years. So I want you to understand that identity crisis is a normal part of your adolescence years. Now, they're not the only ones noticing this. In fact, other groups can take advantage of this if your child is not having productive conversations with you. In other words, gangs understand very well that your teenager is going through an identity crisis. College fraternities and sororities understand this concept. Drug dealers understand this concept. Political causes understand this. Social media understands this. In other words, if you don't have a proactive conversation with your teenager about this natural, normal, okay place where they're going to be confused about who they really are, then when someone alerts them that they're having an identity crisis, immediately begin to form an identity with the group that told them in the first place. And this is why I think a lot of our kids spend more time talking to other groups about their personal issues than they do in their own home. Another concept that's important here. There's a huge difference between aspirational identity and actual identity. I can't tell you how many teenagers that I work with tell me things they don't really know how to tell their parents. Now, I'll tell you this. When I work with a teenager, one of the first things I do is I sit down with their parents and I tell them, if it's not of a life-threatening nature, you're probably going to share some things with me that you may not be able to tell your parents. I am not going to go running to your parents right away. I'm going to help you bring that information to your parents. And I honor that because I want them to have that level of confidentiality. Now, if it's life-threatening, then they know in the very first session that that's going to be something that we immediately talk to mom and dad about. That being said, I'm concerned at how many of our teenagers, there's a wide gap between their actual identity and their aspirational identity. What's the difference? Aspirational is what everyone thinks they are, what everyone expects them to be, who culture tells them they are. This may be even the person they're aspiring to be, but that is often very different than who they really are. And it really alarms me when I hear teenagers tell me that they cannot talk to their parents about faith and God and friends and school and college and future and passions. They're concerned that it doesn't fit into the aspirational box of their parents, and so it's a hands-off conversation. One of the worst things we can do is allow our teenagers to pretend to be somebody they're not. I want you to think about that for a second. Imagine if you in your home right now have a teenager and their true identity, that is forming within them, that they believe is who they are and who they're becoming, and they can't tell you that? They can't talk to you about that? I hope that is an attention getter for you. Now, don't run off half-cocked and have a family meeting and make everybody open up about who they really are. It doesn't work that way. I only point it out because I want teenagers and parents to be able to communicate about these natural, normal, healthy, and good changes that are happening in their life at this particular time. Now, I alluded to this in the last video, and I have to unpack this with you now. So we talked about the parental line, and we'll show that again for you now. The parental line is a measuring tool for parents to determine which parenting style their child is ready for. Okay? Children are only ready for parental. They're only ready for parental authority. When a child is little and you tell them to get out of the road, or you grab them up real quick and you pull them out of the road, that's not a discussion. There's no reasons given. You don't have to justify yourself. You're their parent. They're in danger. End of story. Now, they're not going to be 3 forever, right? So at some point, they have to begin to move. Remember, I talked about tasks in the home last video session where we talked about graduation opportunities. Graduation happens as maturity levels increase. So your kid's going to get older just because the sun comes up today. But just because the sun's coming up tomorrow doesn't mean that your child's going to become more mature. And so I want to make some observations about this parental line with you and maybe give you some things to think about that can be helpful to you. The first one is this: parents, not children, should set the parameters of when a child gets to cross the parental line. Now, do you see at the bottom of our graph where it says parentified child? A parentified child basically is someone who's too big for their britches. A parentified child can be a very difficult family member. Because, and I've even asked teenagers this in session with their parents, do you think you are on the same level of authority as your parents? And the parentified child will say yes. They have this equality mindset about human beings, totally independent of the authority structure that should have been established a long time ago. In other words, we can allow a child to cross that parental line too quickly, but my first belief here for you is that parents should be the ones setting those particular boundaries. All right, number 2. It's maturity, not age, that's the determining factor for crossing the parental line. Now, here's why this structure is so important. You probably, if you have more than one child, you probably have one child that's going to increase in maturity faster than their sibling did. In other words, you might actually have, this is possible, the younger child is more mature in certain areas. And the older child might have an issue with your allowing that younger child to participate in maybe some graduation promotional things where they're getting perks, benefits, and trust between you and them that the older child doesn't have. Now, I want to give you something that this is just golden. I'm going to share something with you that you're going to probably never forget. How do you know whether or not a child is demonstrating higher levels of maturity? This is not a relative concept, in my opinion. It's all about respect. It's all about respect. Maturity yields a respectful, humble heart. So I use this paradigm all the time. This is how I use this in my parenting. It's also how I allow people to get close to me or not. And it's 4 letters, and it's the acronym TIME. Time, information, money, and emotions. Here's how I look at this. If somebody is exercising respect in these 4 areas, in my mind, their maturity levels are increasing. Are they respectful of people's time? I know missing the school bus every now and then is not a big deal, but on a regular basis, that's disrespectful. I know I accidentally shared some information I was supposed to keep because it was a family secret. Every now and then people make mistakes, but if I have a bad habit of sharing information prematurely, that's disrespectful. I know sometimes we spend money on things that aren't necessarily best for us. I remember when I was a 16-year-old, it was the coolest thing. I got my driver's license and I had 20 in my pocket and I went to the Circle K. What was it, a Circle K? It was a 7-Eleven. I went to a 7-Eleven and I bought a big gulp and a candy bar and I thought I was an adult. It was huge. But when we allow our kids to have resources like money and they can't demonstrate a level of self-control with that, that's a respect issue, is it not? When it comes to emotions, if our children aren't careful with other people's emotions and they expect other people to be careful with theirs, that is a maturity issue. That's a respect issue. So here's what I'm saying with this. I actually think it's fairly measurable to determine which child is ready to move a little bit closer up the scale, a little across the parental line, because if you're demonstrating maturity and respect in the areas that I mentioned, time, information, money, and emotions. If your child is demonstrating levels of respect here, you're raising an adult. That is a big deal. And I think you'll experience the benefits of that as well in your home. So when a child demonstrates these, I think it's normal and natural and healthy to point that out. And I would even follow that with some promotional kinds of things. So number 3, parental authority, or parenting is authority-based. Influence is relationship-based. As your kids reach double digits, they should be moving across, getting closer to the parental line. I don't think it should be crossed altogether, but I think the maturity levels should be demonstrating that. And so your approach changes, all right? I want to share this one thing with you real quick that I've learned years ago. I think it's very important. Rules minus relationship equals rebellion. These are 3 concepts. Rules, relationship, rebellion. In other words, if I try to exercise authority in a non-relationship format, I'm probably going to get a rebellious response, especially in a family unit. That's why as kids get older, they really do deserve to understand why you made those decisions and why this is going to happen, because that's more relationally based. Now, when you sit down to have a conversation with your teenager, you have to ask yourself, which of the 3 is getting the most emphasis? Here's where a lot of parents, I think, make the mistake with their teenagers. Between rules, relationship, and rebellion, every time they sit down to have a conversation about a mishap or something that happened in the home, it's a rules-based conversation. Now, here's another error, I think, with too many parents. If they're not having a rules-based conversation, they're having a rebellion-based conversation. You did this, and then you did that, and then you did this, and then you did that, and what am I going to do with you, and I can't believe, and da-da-da. And so what I'm suggesting is, I think there should be a balance here. Sometimes we should sit down with our kids and remind them that we are helping them move towards adulthood, and that we want to have a relationship with them on that basis, and that what has happened has hurt that relationship, and it bothers me that this relationship has been wounded, and so I want to talk to you now on the basis of how we can repair the relationship. Do you see the difference? That's a very different approach. And I will say this, in the work that I have with teenagers, when someone gives them a frame to talk about the relationship, you'd be surprised how quickly their behavior changes. So here's some phrases that I've put down here for you to consider that I think reflect the difference. Parental versus influential. So a parental phrase might say, well, I'll tell you why, because you're a child. But if you're working on more of a relational-based authority, instead of saying because you're a child, you might remind them, remember their identity, it's because you're becoming an adult now. Like, oh, that's right. I am. I'm becoming an adult. It's like you're lifting up their eyes to see their future possibilities rather than remind them of where they came from. Here's another one. Because you're still my responsibility. I've heard that phrase a lot with parents. That's what you would say to a child. To a teenager, you might suggest something like this. Because I want you to start taking more adult-like responsibility. That's a totally different conversation. One last one, and then we'll move on. Because I said so. Again, a 3-year-old, that's enough. But a 15-year-old, it might be more helpful for them, instead of saying, I told you so because I said so, maybe it would be more helpful to say, because we had an agreement. And I want to trust you. And I'm really hopeful that we can move more towards a trust-based relationship. So I think, simply stated, one of the biggest crises our teenagers have in our homes is that they're allowed to cross the parental line a little too soon. So let's do some recap here. How do we give hope to our children if they appear to be losing hope? Well, first video we talked about giving our kids a compelling future. And in some cases that might mean you taking a look at your life and you envisioning a compelling future for yourself. I think vision is caught better than taught. And when you're showing your child as you grow older and as you mature that you actually are looking forward to getting older, that you're chasing after something of a compelling future, it's more of a model, more of a teaching model for them than you can imagine. So talk to your kids about co-creating that compelling future. The second thing we've talked about is giving them an honest identity with an understanding about how to change it for the better. You know, you wouldn't want your child to not be able to answer this question. Here's the question. Are you having to keep parts of yourself hidden from me? You'd like to be able to ask your teenager that question and them say, no, because we talk about these things. And how disheartening it is when the answer to that question is no, but the reality is yes. They are having to keep parts of themselves to themselves because they're afraid that what you aspire them to be is quite a ways off from who they really want to be. So we want to give our children an honest identity about who they really see themselves becoming. And then we want to also give them tasks that lead to graduation, that give them an opportunity to move on to something more exciting. So I'm thrilled to be able to share some of these insights with you, and maybe a handful of them prove useful. My belief is that at least something here is worthy of a conversation with your whole family, at least with your teen, and ask them what they think about it. Ask them if they're willing to discuss some of these things, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that our teens have the opportunity to talk to us about how they're really feeling about things, how they really see things, and that they don't have to go outside of the home in order to gain an identity or to have an honest conversation about who they really are. I care about kids, care about families, and I know you care about yours. So these tools are here for your use. If I can help you in any way, if there's anything that I can do to support you, please reach out. Let me know what I can do. If you need the help of a professional to reach out, there's ways to go about that. Again, I'd be happy to share that with you. But what I would love to do is just leave you with this idea that the children that we talk so much about, that we would just literally die for, they want to know if we'll live for them and if we'll allow them to communicate with us in a way that just infuses life back into our families. I encourage you to talk to your kid. Let them know that you're there to listen. Thank you for watching.